many of you may be unaware of the fact that he is a keen, ardent conservationist, not in the forefront but at the background. He does a lot for conservation, and we approach him on a lot of issues, and he is very supportive of it. And that's what we think icons and celebrities like him can play a big role in their own part in wildlife conservation. They need not be a conservationist or scientists on their own, but even if they are supporting from the background and their name carries huge weight in the government and also in the society, and that's a big thing he does, and we really always look forward and expect and also bank upon his support on a lot of issues. Sir, you also come from a rich legacy of both sport and preservation of wildlife. How do you see from that background things have changed in both in Karnataka and also in India? So in this background, how do you see the future of wildlife conservation in India?
Well, I mean, just for sport, certainly that is extinct, and we are better for it as a society. As far as conservation goes and our role in it, playing in it, I would always say the urban sphere needs to understand the idiosyncrasies of the rural, and especially those living in these border areas where there is regular interaction of a megafauna on a day-to-day basis.
Okay.
And even in semi-rural sort of spheres, the leopard is present, including in Mysore, where we have a good population, in the hills, which have not caused us any trouble. And Bombay is also a testament to that, that they have no trouble with the leopards there. But certainly we have to have a more sensitization of understanding the local idiosyncrasies of those people living in those border areas, because without that you cannot solve the issue. You have to take in their needs as well, because they are the ones living it every day.
Okay.
And their daily needs are required them to be interacting with the forest. So that the urban sphere can definitely understand and be more sensitive to. And at the same time, we have the role to play in bringing awareness and understanding what true conservation is, and not applying laws of, say, human laws which you would to your pets or your other animals.
And we need to clearly segregate and tailor-make solutions to both.
Yes, I mean, animal rights exist within where humanity exists, which is within the cities and within the rural sphere. And that is certainly a very noble aspect of what humanity has done over the years to protect, what has been from man's best friend, a dog, to every other animal species we domesticated, and giving them equal rights and understanding our role in that aspect, given the fact that our entire history has been powered for the most part by domesticating animals. But again, once you step beyond now what we delineate as forest and as for land or for wildlife or wildlife habitats, the laws there are different. So and that conservation laws demand a completely different approach. If there is a man-eating tiger, if there is a rogue elephant or a problematic animal, there is a certain process involved, and we as a society, especially in the urban sphere, who are not well averse to what is happening down there, once the process involved has gone through and you see that they are moving towards absolutely there's no other option but to capture the animal and put it in a zoo, we cannot be opposing it or saying it while being unaware completely of the situation, being vehemently opposed to it. So I think that role of sensitizing ourselves towards what is laws for conservation and following protocol there is completely different from animal rights in a city.
So you're talking about a very pragmatic approach of how do we deal with conflict-prone animals, individual animals, rather than just looking at them as every individual species has the equal right, like 450 million livestock we have in this country, but endangered species or wildlife have a different kind of approach that we need to take, is what you're telling. That's very illuminating. It would also be nice to take one or two questions from the viewers already. We can start answering some of the questions. It will be nice to see. Okay, there's also a question about zoos, and it was also a question which was on my list. So who is this asking about zoos? Mysore has one of the finest zoos in the country, sir. And it was set up of course, by your family itself. Um, uh, and in your opinion, and also a question which says, zoos can preserve wildlife species but affect the psychological health of animals. What is your take on this? Which I will also add to it. What role can zoos play in modern wildlife conservation?
Well, I mean, I think certainly they cannot be as they were once before capturing wild animals to put them. We had the famous movie Hatari, which I watched a million times as a child, where they used to capture the wild animals to bring back to zoos.
Yeah.
And as romantic as that movie is, that is no longer a viable option. I think zoos need to maintain their own population.
Yeah.
And if need be, to add to maybe a reserve where there are where it's locally gone extinct, certain species which were there before, maybe the zoo can be called upon to repopulate in that species, is my personal opinion. And again, this is not a conservationist opinion, it's my own personal opinion. With regards to the Mysore Zoo, it's believed that much before there was an actual formal zoo there, they were all the wild animals received as gifts, that is pre-British era, and from many years before were housed there in the summer palace at that area.
One of the gifts which was received was the cheetah, and it was housed in the Mysore Zoo as well.
So
the Indian cheetah, actually.
Yes. So before it became a zoo, all the wild animals, as you know, a princely house would have, was housed there. Is believed to be what it was, and so they were kept there. And then it was formalized as a zoo when His Highness Chamaraja Wadiyar the 10th essentially cut down half of what was our summer palace in Lokranjan Mahal and dedicated to the zoo. It has some of the nicest heritage buildings.
Sir, so you mean to say it was a part of the summer palace?
It is to this day part of the summer palace land, and as per the the treaty which we signed, and the right to our property continues to be property of the palace. But it's used by the government for their for the purpose of being a zoo until such a time that they decide to not use it as such. So the many parks around Mysore, in view of preserving Mysore, the aesthetic and identity of Mysore and the nature and the parks around Mysore, this clause was added into the property list. So Nishad Bagh, Kuparna Park and many other parks are in this fall under this gambit. The zoo is one of them. So it continues to be. So essentially at that time what they did was halve the summer palace which was there, Lokranjan Mahal, and dedicated it to the zoo. And I think to this day continues to be one of India's oldest zoos. Obviously now they're much bigger zoos where modern, most beautiful zoos you'll see, and they've done tremendous steps they've taken from, I mean, I've been going there since a child, towards conserving and protecting and ensuring that wildlife, or rather the animals they have there have a good life. With regards to the animals in the zoo being having different sort of stress levels, it was the study done here. Obviously, being in the wild, you have predators, you have so many other problems that the animals have to look into. In the zoo, them having none. The elephants at least were found to have a much lower level of stress in the zoo because they didn't have to find food. Summer times are not as hard as they would be in our forests, and no predators around. So that reduced the stress level. So take that, I mean, you take that again with a grain of salt, because you know even we would even in jail you get fed, and you don't have to worry about anything in life, but still.
I'm sure you're looking at it from an educational perspective, but you are a person who likes animals to be out in the wild rather than...
I mean that's the same for all of us, right? We can certainly have an institution that feeds us, looks to us for every care in the world, and we don't have to do anything, but again you're jailed then. So it's the same analogy which you would use there.
Maybe do you want to write more questions? Meanwhile, sir, I also know that you're a voracious reader. Is there a specific book on wildlife which you really like, or a couple of books?
Personally, obviously, every year at some point or the other, I do pick up Jim Corbett. Just because, you know, that despite him being at first obviously learning his trade because of and being able to shoot down that many man-eaters because he was a hunter, but nonetheless, if you read his books, what you see is truly probably one of India's first conservationists, and if you read his life story, etc., you know he worked tremendously and was one of the first people to call out, alongside a couple others, to call out the fact that if we didn't stop hunting the way we were hunting, we would finish off our population of tigers in India. So he was one of the first people to call that out, alongside, of course, in those times helping out in many cases with man-eaters were really problematic.
Okay.
Famously, of course, Rudraprayag we know, which was on the famous Badrinath Kedarnath route. From that to many other man-eaters which are causing a lot of issues for them locally there. Alongside that also, his ideas of conservation and his understanding of forest, and just reading and knowing how he would know how to place himself at a certain spot, knowing fully well that the animal was coming there, was something that is truly remarkable. And his way he could pretty much make up any call in the forest, from a number of birds to pretty much all the animals. And then even his idea of calling a tiger or calling a leopard, because of he knew what was a mating call to what was a regular everyday the calling. So it was just I think something remarkable.
Any other book which you have liked?
I mean, we've certainly obviously take it with a pinch of salt, but our local Jim Corbett is Kenneth Anderson, so you'll obviously read him to get some this thing. But again, I mean, there are many stories. And we don't need to get into that, but nonetheless, which should point you in either way. We certainly read all of, not all, but quite a few of Valmiki Thappar's books. I've read some of your books as well. And it's a continuing process to just learn about conservation, and National Geographic magazine is one aspect of that as well. So magazines and books make up of certainly most of the wildlife wise reading.
So one very important part, and I also observed during our interactions, is that you like historical architecture. You like old places, and several of the inspection bungalows in the forest today are set up by your family, by the Mysore state, and beautiful structures, and some of them have been built in fantastic locations, wonderful strategic locations. Do you think that that heritage, though they are in the midst of the forest, wonderful structures, that heritage, has it been continued in your opinion?
Certainly the building of a Mysore lodge, a Mysore-centric lodge, like what is here in surrounding like Sungutkate, or what was in now with the jungle lodges in Kabini, or those are the lodges that we see in Kalkere, for example. All of them certainly were never built like that again. They were unique buildings made for lodges. They were certainly borrowed from the British tradition in Africa of building the lodges in the African wilderness, but had its own Indianness to it and Indian style to it brought in. From the use of the local materials, and then the idiosyncrasies that pervade that to crafting such a lodge. All of that was brought in. So they were very unique buildings, and I think worthy of being preserved. I've not seen very many new travelers' bungalows or IBs in that same vein post that, even if people have the good fortune of having forest land near forests, I don't think anybody has made such structures anymore. As far as conserving them, certainly even though they are in, as you said, very pristine forest areas, like Kalkere on the fire line, etc., which is its own, in a way, sort of maybe good because it's another era and another time. So it's preserved as is, and maybe via video or some other thing you can see what it is. Not just these few structures. I mean, you have a huge number of forts which are within forests. For example, if you look at what is one of the most beautiful ranges, Lokkere, Kundrekere, and all of them. There are over 11 forts there. Even
Lokkere is basically in Bandipur Tiger Reserve.
In Bandipur Tiger Reserve, and then even Venugopal Swami temple is the remnants of the fort are there. So these were all outposts of the last sort of border between Karnataka and Tamil, or the then Mysore state, or whatever Kannada state was there, to the Tamil state which was there. So the Moyar would be the means they cross over and went into the Tamil states. So there are many forts there which are you cannot say preserved because they've been there for, it's been forest long time before, and forest long time after they were utilized as forts. But I think some means of having the video or documenting it from an architect and understanding what was there, and then leaving it to erode away to nature would be for those purposes. As far as what the forest department has as travelers bungalows, I would see them at least conserving the structures as is, and having limited utility of them so that they're preserved as is.
Sir, if I had asked you one question, is there some message you want to give out to the younger generation about wildlife conservation or anything in general before we move on to questions from the viewers?
Sure. My only message is this, is to sensitize yourselves to the realities of conservation. Just because you think it may be right in your sphere and what is humane law now,
Yeah.
it's not necessarily that applies to the
Wildlife,
natural world
okay.
or to wildlife.
Okay.
So I would say sensitizing yourself to that and gaining more awareness about that aspect of it is true. And then a personal request with especially the princely houses, understand that many of us, even though it was for what we understand now to be not such a noble means of sport,
Yeah.
in hunting, those reserves were preserved, especially here in Karnataka. The fact that we have such a wealth of forests came down from that heritage of understanding wildlife had to be preserved. As much as early as you said, from 1931, and even before, there was places dedicated as wildlife reserves here in Karnataka, and we have the strongest contiguous forest apart from the northeast here in Karnataka.
Wonderful, sir. Wonderful, sir. Especially coming from your mouth about a message even to the princely states is a great message. So we have a question about reintroduction of cheetah into India by one of the viewers. What do you think about it?
I believe they're reintroducing in Kuno National Park in Madhya Pradesh. So,
Yeah.
I mean, as much as I'd like it, from a selfish aspect of wanting to see the cheetah back in India again, and it's absolutely an amazing animal from what we see, and featured so much on, every wildlife documentary. The fact of the matter is, will it be introduced like a zoo animal, or will it be introduced to be wild and free?
Okay.
We do not have that much big contiguous grassland.
Natural,
flat
okay.
grassland, I don't believe we don't have that much anywhere really in India, because obviously the strains of such a huge population and such a huge agrarian base, most of the grassland is now farmland.
Okay.
So if it's left wild, no doubt you'll see conflict between the farmers and the cheetah, and knowing fully well it isn't megafauna like the others, it will be certainly fall victim to many conflicts.
Okay.
And secondly, if it's just as a zoo animal where it's being conserved, like it's being fed and then left to roam free in vast land, wouldn't be as fulfilling an effort towards conserving as being wild and truly free.
Okay.
So it's a very tough question to answer in that sense, whether I'd obviously love it to be back in India and love it never have gone. And the additional thing is, it's not the Indian species, not the
subspecies,
Asiatic cheetah that's coming back, it's the African subspecies.
Yeah, that's something which I also vouch what you're saying, is that we don't have such large natural habitats for cheetahs left anymore in this country, and the issue of subspecies is also there. The Asiatic cheetah is in really minute numbers. There are supposed to be only 12 left in Iran now.
Yes.
And even to have small founder populations of about 50 cheetahs in India, we may still require about 20 to 40,000 square kilometers of its natural grassland and scrubland habitat. So I can completely agree with you about your impression that we unfortunately don't have those natural habitats. I would also like as much to have the cheetahs in India. I also vouch with your points about having natural habitats, and also the issue of subspecies. It may be because it's so diverse, wildlife subspecies are also very diverse, of course genetically as well. We have a few more questions. Unfortunately there are lots of questions, but we would like to pick and select a few within the time sphere we have. Somebody is asking what are the steps you would suggest for tiger conservation?
I think, given the amount of space we have as dedicated as tiger reserve, we have, for that amount of space, we have more than enough tigers. We have actually excess tigers. So if
in some of the reserves,
in some of the reserves certainly, and looking at it, I'm only aware in Karnataka we have excess tigers in certain reserves. So so that comes down to, one is removing huge swaths of lantana which our entire ranges are covered in lantana and other invasive species, will allow for natural growth of virgin forest. Thereby the herbivores come back in much larger numbers, so that then, and in much greater spheres of jungle, so that the tiger can roam more internally and not come out. And the other tiger conservation, other than that, would be again allowing either private players or the government itself adding in more land.
Okay.
Which I know it's very tough ask, because you want more land to come under revenue if the government has to gain more revenue more revenue itself. But I think dedicating more land, while not such an easy solution, certainly from private players who can have the ability to buy vast tracts of land, which India now, the wealth, there is a lot of wealth in many individuals who are wanting to contribute towards, even if it adds on 100 acres around a forest. We know now, the science says, if you continually add around a forest, it adds to its growth, rather than sort of building in the middle of nowhere, dedicating land towards a forest. So that aspect of it, I think, would be certainly something that you could add on to tiger conservation, I think, is my personal opinion, just seeing from the fact that the success stories that have happened in South Africa and many other African countries.
So is there a particular wildlife species which is currently critically endangered, let's say like the great Indian bustard in India, you would like to see thriving, so that I know you have a very young son of 4 years old, and you would like him to see, what species would that be?
I think certainly, if you were to point to one thing, I didn't actually been aware of the entire riverine system that was you've pointed out in MM Hills that we have in Kaveri Wildlife Sanctuary. So that, I think, there, and you have what is, I believe, the emblem of that area is the grizzled giant squirrel.
Yeah.
That is something I think worth. And pick and choose. Lovely to see the snow leopard.
Okay.
I haven't seen one personally in the wild, but I think that will be preserved to a certain degree because of just the landscape it lives in. But nonetheless, it is facing many issues which require conservation, and that would be something, sort of really a mystical animal in that sense, worth preserving and dedicating a lot of resource towards preserving.
It's really heartening. I would have expected you to tell, I want my son to see the tiger for prosperity, but you picked a subject and an ecosystem which is critically endangered. The riverine ecosystem in Kaveri Wildlife Sanctuary, or this ecosystem is very endangered in the entire country. Very few pockets of such vast stretches of riverine ecosystems, and you picked up a species which is very small, lesser known, the grizzled giant squirrel.
Well, not that the tiger doesn't require conservation.
No, I agree with you.
It requires conservation, but the tiger will be conserved.
Yeah.
There is no doubt about it, because it is our national animal, and it is the pride, and only India has a sustainable tiger population world over. No one else has that in the wild, in its natural habitat that has been. So the tiger will be conserved. There's no doubt about it. It's just, is there dedicating enough space towards them? And so we'll know soon enough.
No, that's what is very heartening, is that you picked a species which is lesser known, doesn't have the kind of publicity it needs, like the tiger gets or many other charismatic species gets. So it's really heartening to see that you're picking a species and a landscape and an ecosystem which are so critically endangered, but very lesser known by the world itself. So I will take a last question, sir, before we unfortunately have to close this session, as much as I would have loved it to continue. So we have a question where our viewer is asking, what are the best ways to coexist with wildlife and forest edge dwelling communities?
Well, it's quite a not so easy to answer, is straightforward to answer. So wildlife communities in and around the forest, again, this idea of being planetary stewards, they aren't aware of. For them, that is the forest, and this is their livelihood here. And it's day to day, their existence is pretty much, they require a resource, the forest as a resource. And we have come in with our laws and put it in that they cannot go in there and live their traditional lives, which is a tough ask, and a different. So most of the communities living around are former tribal, formerly tribals, still designated as tribals, but now being re-amalgamated into our world. So their existence from time immemorial has been in the forest and with the forest. So how do you, firstly, entire tradition and their entire identity, how do you ensure that that is preserved, but at the same time the facilities of what the modern world gives them are available to them and not to be abused or anything in that sense. So that is, I think, the key aspect that we have to look into, and how they can continually be in touch with the forest if they wish to be, but at the same time adhering to some of our conservation laws, which no, obviously they cannot be trapping, they cannot be utilizing animals for or rather hunting as they would for their food source before. So all of these aspects need to be looked into in those communities bordering a forest area. As far as, of course, the animal conflict for the farmers there and everything, again, you understand their plight because that is their livelihood. If the elephant eats up, or say even somebody farming chilies, if a number of peacocks come in and completely remove 2-3 acres of chilies, you can understand their their plight. That's a good amount of revenue for them going to waste. There's livelihood as well. So these are very unique problems that we have to look into. Monkeys cause a huge problem for our areca farmers. Many issues like that. You can keep on naming them. Wild boar in and around Mysore pigs wild pigs create a lot of issue for farmers. So how do you understand to curb all of this and at the same time preserve what is the pristineness of the wildlife, at the same time their livelihood as well?
Very nice, sir. If there was something else which I have missed, or if you would like to add to our viewers, please go ahead.
No, nothing much. It's been a pleasure to sit here and talk to you about wildlife. It's always something that I don't need any second thought about doing. It's truly I think a privilege to be here in Mysore, and to a certain extent even Bangalore, having so many wildlife reserves so near us, maybe 4-5 hours from Bangalore and just a couple hours at most from Mysore, if not closer. So it's truly, part of every person in Mysore will have some affinity to wildlife or some knowledge about it, and it's really, I think, great that we get to continue to talk about this. And even though the more you get into conservation, the more you see it as sort of a losing race, I think it's one worth fighting. In the end, anyway, nature will win. So it's just a matter of whether we want to go along for the ride, or face ourselves with multitude of issues and even extinction of what we have built as humans if we are not to coincide and collaborate with nature.
So thank you so much. It was thank you again for
it's been a pleasure
participating and also hosting us right in front of the
not
palace.
at all, please.
And thank you all of you. That was for you, Shri Yaduveer Chamaraja Wadiyar from the Maharaja of Mysore Kingdom. A fantastic conservationist, very interested not just in conservation but also in art, history and heritage. And if you ever get a chance, you should listen to him talking about various histories of this southern Indian part especially. He's got a wealth of knowledge of Indian history as well. Thank you again, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Sanjay. Pleasure.